It's time to get ice hard in Sector 5 ARC. The first two go-arounds almost seem dull, just grabbing ice missiles and power bombs, albeit with something in the background and then an emergency alarm going off right as you're leaving the first time. But then the fun really begins. One of the hardest bosses in the game, Nightmare, who manipulates gravity and then just starts slamming at your face when that doesn't work. The lore of the blue parasites coming from here is also mildly interesting, but when you've got other sectors about to explode or introducing you to your evil clone, it's not as exciting. Doesn't help that ice is probably the most expected aesthetic in games. It has to be on the checklist of every video game along with lava and secret base. It has its moments like having to freeze big blob towers to speed boost, but it's got some stiff competition. It's time to put on our water wings for Sector 4 AQA. This is the first example of a sector out of chronological order since you technically get to it before 3, but then also way after 3, hence I'm just doing them in numbered order. The first visit is pretty harrowing, avoiding the electric water and dealing with one very speedy serpent. I'm sure there's a double entendre in there somewhere. The second visit is actually pretty cool, navigating underwater environments to get to diffusion missiles, and you can also get a super secret message if you shine spark back to the beginning first. Technically, the second visit doesn't involve a boss fight, but that's fine since Sirius itself is already a pretty big handful, and the second visit is right after a pretty tough boss. Good sector, and I'm always a sucker for those underwater coral aesthetics, but not as much of note happens in it. It's time to sweat to an alien world in Sector 1 SRX. Being the first sector, it starts out relatively simple, just clearing up a few fans from the goopy parasites that made the fatal mistake of touching the thermostat. It's also where you later go down a pretty similar looking acid area and getting your eardrums blown out by a fake Ridley Shrills. The CIA must have come up with that pain noise. Probably the most interesting thing is the one imitating a Chozo statue. Gotta admire the determination to sit there motionless hoping Samus will come along and fall for it. It even alludes to the Omega later on with Metroid husks laying around. They really need to learn to clean up after themselves. All around good starting sector that both introduces the idea of the X imitating objects and provides plenty of intrigue on return visits. It's time to feel the burn in Sector 3 PYR. This sector almost seems weirdly mundane when you start out, just a security check and then getting quote-unquote super missiles, fighting a boss, and back out. It's the return trip where things really get spicy. Literally, because the X is about to cause a meltdown in the boiler room and make the entire station explode. It's also probably the only boss fight that isn't X-infected, at least not yet, but we'll save that for later. Just a very rogue robot with what looks like a very big human brain. What is this, the Big Empty? It's also kind of weird that you have to shoot what looks like a defenseless scientist, even if it's actually an X-parasite imitating him. Not exactly the best protection. Not the most exciting sector at first, but that timer to stop the meltdown really gets your heart racing, and upgraded missiles are nice too. Better grab our machete because it's Sector 2 TRO. This is actually where you first encounter your biggest threat by far, yourself. Or at least an X-parasite posing as you, creatively called SAX. Funny thing is, it's also where she later gains the means of dealing damage to the thing, the plasma beam, so it has both a low point and a high point when you think about it. It's also where you gain the Morph Ball Bomb and High Jump, always great to have a little more pep in your step, and shows change over time with caterpillars becoming hideous moth things. Add to that a Spore Chozo statue with corpse lilies ready to gnaw your face off, and this sector isn't hurting for variety or potential peril. It even introduces security door clearances and just has a great tropical theme with a mild bit of tech because it's actually all just an illusion, but it's a good looking illusion. It's time for Advanced Darkness in Sector 6 NOC. Fittingly, the sector about the darkness is the most horror-filled, first with blue parasites you have to avoid like the plague, and then learning about a secret Metroid breeding program. The two bosses are also interesting, the first being a Core X that downloaded data into itself, and the second a return of the box robot, and each having a very helpful item, the Varia suit and wave beam. Freshly getting the Varia suit and having the blue ones dive bombing you before realizing it's now healing you and then starting to flee on sight of you is actually pretty amusing. Between providing a tense moment the first go around and then making a huge plot revelation the second time around, this is a very memorable sector and arguably the most befitting the themes of fusion. It's time to take control in main deck. This has to be the ultimate area in the game, with 4 bosses and 4 trips spent in it. I was gonna rank it first, but figured a behemoth like this deserves last picks. It even has the one SAX encounter where you have to let it see you, thankfully with Varia suit and ice missiles to give you a decent fighting chance. As if all that wasn't enough, you get those adorable little creatures from Super Metroid, confirming to all you heartless monsters that let them die that saving them is the correct and canon choice. You also get to find the frozen corpse of Ridley just chilling in the freezer before it gets X-infected and collapses. Talk about fall from grace. In case I wasn't clear enough, this is the goat of all the sectors. It's the Giga Chad that sectors inspire to be. I want to frame this sector above my fireplace. It's time to overview your mission reports. You probably don't need me to say this, Metroid Fusion is a pretty great game, even if it's not my favorite Metroid game. While it does lock you to sectors and has a bit of that thing I'm always ranting and complaining about linearity, it never gets to the point where it feels like a straight line. Its biggest strength, of course, is the feeling of horror, where Samus is weak and there's a clone of her at her best, even if most of it is just waiting for SAX to leave. It's probably the one Metroid game that actually has a lore reason for the health and ammo pickups. Guess X-Parasites just have missiles stuck in their blobby bodies. Overall, it's a very good Metroid game, and I'd certainly recommend it to anyone with a passing interest in Metroidvania. It's definitely far superior to its counterpart, Other M.